Welcome, everyone, to the Garden of Thought, presented by the Sports Jedi Network, and here on YouTube on the Sports Jedi Media Network. We also are on the Garden of Thought podcast and the Garden of Thought pod on YouTube, and also on Wrestling Soup. So there's everywhere. Also, Rams fan, thank you for being in the chat so early, even before showtime. Nice to see you. My guest this episode, you know him, you love him, Professor Emeritus John Hubbs. So, Professor, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm hanging in there. I was in Baltimore at the end of June visiting my mom, and she passed away
Very
last
sorry.
week. So that's kind of affected everything. Of course, losing your mother at any age is not fun. Um, but I'm also enjoying my new status. As of a couple of weeks ago, I'm Professor Emeritus, and as of last Monday, I'm no longer on the payroll of the University of Kansas. So I'm 100% retired now.
I am hearing a bit of an echo, Kevin. Can you mute your mic? I think that might be you. Okay. Yep. Anyway, um, not to diminish the reason you were in Baltimore recently, but also in your trip before your mom passed, um, you met a certain friend, and that would be me. We met for breakfast, and then we strolled around, continuing our date to go to a bookstore, which was half comic store and half regular bookstore, but definitely
And it
heavy
was an
on.
amazing bookstore. I'll put a plug in for Atomic Books. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, in Hamden, Baltimore, but Hamden sort of likes to believe it's got its own neighborhood characteristic, and it does to an extent. But Atomic Books was awesome. So if you like graphic novels, comics, but also regular books, it scaled heavy towards the science fiction and fantasy, but also like things that were science. I mean, it's almost like the show. It had all the fantasy and the comic stuff, but it also had the actual scientific works or more serious stuff that were adjacent to all of those topics. So yeah, I'll put in a plug for Atomic Books also for those of you who are in or near Baltimore, or if you're just in Baltimore for whatever reason looking for something to do. In any event, so what you don't know about John, if you're first here, is that as I mentioned, he's been on the show. I mean, might be close to time number 10. We met quite accidentally. Um, and I think at first he was hesitant to come on the show, but now we've become fast friends. He wasn't hesitant; he's shaking his head. Um, he went to both Harvard and Yale. He's been teaching at the University of Kansas for what is it, 36 full years or 35 full years?
36 full years. I arrived there 37 years ago to begin my first semester. So, but 36 academic years.
Fantastic. And also about John, he is archaeologist and anthropologist. Those two things, as I learned during doing the show, are sort of two sides of the same coin, or maybe the same side of the same coin, just slightly different attentions or focuses. And he's also a geek like us. He liked all of the science fiction. I mean, obviously, we went to Atomic Bookstore, but he liked all of the science fiction. He liked all of the fantasy. He liked Eric Von Daniken. He liked the Graham Hancock stuff. He wanted to believe. He's like Fox Mulder, but he's a scientist, and the science is what the science is, and science can change, of course, as you learn more and dig more. And so I definitely commend all of you who are not familiar with Professor Hoops's appearances on this show to go back and listen to all of them. We've done great shows on the origin of humanity. We went back basically 7 million years to the present. Lots of shows on all sorts of different areas, including one called Debunkamania and some other stuff. The topic I've asked him for today is that so we call prehistoric basically anything before there was writing. So basically, we start with Sumeria, but we know the Egyptian civilization was earlier than that. And of course, prehistoric, well, it was also like the Flintstones when, men and dinosaurs, worked together in quarries. Um, but there are names and groups of peoples, we name them. I think I don't know that they name themselves. I think we name them basically after areas. Oh, he's shaking his head again. Hey, there
No,
are.
you're correct. The names for most of them, we don't know what they call themselves. We give them names for our own convenience.
It's sort of like Neanderthals, like, it's because it was the first discovery or the first confirmed was in a cave in Germany or France called Neanderthal Cave or something. So a lot
Neander
of
Valley.
Neander Valley. So there you go. So we're not going back that far, though. Can't rule out there were. Well, I think you can rule out there were. Hey, stop, Jeff. Jeff, calm down. I asked him to talk about civilizations that we would consider pre-civilization. So we're talking, basically after glacial maximum. I mean, we'll probably have to address the whole Younger Dryas thing, but mostly we're talking about 10,000 BCE to about 5,000 or 6,000 BC, sort of to try to fill in those blanks a little bit. It gets us from cavemen, nomad hunter-gatherers, to the Sumerians and the Egyptians and Babylonians and Hittites and all the groups that you've heard of since then, Greeks, Romans, etc. So please correct and perfect anything that I've said, and elaborate anything about yourself you would like to, and then take us away. Take us to a story that started a long time ago, but just a blink in history.
Yes, it's a blink in history if you talk to geologists, because the world is about 13 billion years old. And what we're talking about is really just a drop in the bucket. And a lot of people are sort of find it very hard to believe that so much happened within a relatively short amount of time. But then on the other hand, people say, humans have been around for, depending on what you want to call humans, either, 2.5 million years or 300,000 years. But a lot of it depends on definitions. And I and my colleagues and other archaeologists and anthropologists spend a lot of time talking about definitions. And it's tricky because you were correct. Prehistoric means before writing systems, okay, before anything was written down. History is the writing down of things. But the question is whether prehistoric means before there was any writing anywhere in the world, or whether prehistoric applies to particular places like South America or Africa or other places, Australia being a good example, where they didn't have writing until people with writing arrived. South America did not have a writing system per se until the arrival of the Spanish in 1532, or actually 1500, depending on what part of South America we're talking about. But anyway, prehistoric is a term that most people associate with dinosaurs and pterodactyls and T-Rex and things like that. But there were prehistoric humans. It's just the humans who did not have writing systems.
Yeah, and somebody in the chat saying writing in caves, and we're talking about writing with letters or characters, not drawings or paintings or sculptures or anything like that. That dates
Well, and
much
that's something
further.
else that people get hung up on definitions about, because technically writing is the ability to represent a language in symbols. So the sounds that we speak, the sounds that come out of our mouth, translated into symbols that are written down. But people kept notations of things like the phases of the moon, or they kept notations of, interactions between different types of animals in cave paintings. And there's a lot of discussion as to whether cave paintings or markings that are found during the Paleolithic period, which is the period of the cave paintings, whether they represent a writing system. And there actually have been some really interesting recent discoveries suggesting that some of them may very well have been. We don't really know the language, but we can recognize some of the symbols, and some of them seem to have a very long history. So it's not cut and dried. There's not a clear bright line between not writing and writing. And that's, one of the things that we get really interested in. People spend their whole careers trying to look at things such as the origin of writing and what defines it and when it happened and where.
Sure. And there's also the possibility, I'm not going to say the probability, that people were writing on things, but those materials just didn't survive. They didn't use baked clay. Their paper wasn't as sturdy as papyrus or whatever their version of paper was, or it was wooden charcoals that burned up or degraded over time. And I'm just completely speculating. But I did a show with I've done lots of shows with Bernie Taylor, but I did one where he traced cave cave painting somewhere. I can't remember. I think it was in Spain, but it's one of those I wish I kept the video, that I could, somehow get to Kevin and republish it here, because you could see the pictures, and he took us through how it was going through the zodiac as the zodiac was back then, and basically telling us that, basically the hero's journey. Now, I'm fully aware that if you're looking for nails and you have a hammer, you might just find it. But it was still interesting. And then apparently I put him accidentally on a side quest where I asked him if he was sure that Sagittarius wasn't a centaur. And actually he's like, actually Sagittarius might be a centaur, might even be a winged centaur. And then there's Pegasus, sort of on the opposite side. So two interesting shows to check out. Actually, all the shows with Bernie are fun. He's quirky, he's smart, he's interesting, and he when I ask him things that he doesn't know, he goes, "I don't know, but that's interesting. Maybe I'll look into that." Or, yeah, that's not my thing.
Yeah, I like Bernie. He's a good friend. I'm very jealous of him and his wife. Lately, he's been doing the cruise ship circuit, where he's getting to go all these amazing places by getting a gig giving lectures on cruise ships about his ideas.
Yes, Kristen Drizza also does that. She was on the show once as well. I'm gonna tell a secret, everyone. I don't think that Bernie watches the shows unless he's on them, but I'm usually his beta test. So before he does a new presentation, he usually comes on here and gives it, and gets the bugs out and sees what some of my questions are, so that you can either pre-answer them or whatever it is. But I'm the beta test, and I'm happy enough to be it. Anyway, with that agreement aside, that Rams fan, you have not been chastened, that you may in fact be correct, that other things constitute writing, but we're just going to go with the agreed upon, sort of hieroglyphics, cuneiform letters, Phoenician letters. That's just how we define the historic period versus the prehistoric period. We're not trying to say with absolute certainty. We're just saying that's the line that we use now. Just like time didn't begin anew upon the birth of Jesus Christ, but that's the calendar we use. So so we're using that as a line, and it's not arbitrary, but it might be subject to change. In any event, I don't know if it's best to start with sort of the tepes and that time of era, or if the end of the glacial maximum was after that, or sort of when we first identified groups that we've named. That's called an acronym, and happens all the time when someone else names a group because we don't know what their name is, or the acronym overtakes what they call themselves. Like, nobody called themselves the Moors, nobody calls themselves the Berbers. Those are acronyms. The Navajo, they don't call themselves the Navajo, they're the Dene, which is also a language that other nations speak. In any event,
Well,
I'm just showing off.
It's helpful, and talking about names, and I'm glad that you brought it up. And I don't want to get really heavy about this because this is a non-academic audience. I'm not talking to scholars. There are probably some scholars listening, but that's not your main audience. But it really helps to have a meaningful vocabulary. And the vocabulary that archaeologists use goes back over 200 years. First of all, with what's called the three age system, which was the Stone Age, the Iron Age, and the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. And then in the 19th century, during the time of Charles Darwin, another term was introduced, which was the concept of the Paleolithic. The Paleolithic, the Mesolithic, and the Neolithic. The Paleolithic is the Old Stone Age. That's Olduvai Gorge. People who were making pebble choppers and Acheulean hand axes. Actually, that's another new name, is Acheulean, which is the term we use for the culture of Homo ergaster and Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis and these other species. See, I'm already beginning to use all these names. I don't know whether people recognize them, but the pre-Homo sapiens species of humans lived during the Old Stone Age or the Paleolithic. The Mesolithic is what starts after the last glacial maximum. Okay, the Mesolithic refers to a period when we begin entering into the Holocene, which is the, well, again, this is also controversial. The Holocene is the geological epoch that has prevailed since the end of the last ice age. And the reason it's controversial is that I believe that we are now in what's called the Anthropocene, which is one in which the climate has been irreversibly altered by human activity. And there's a lot of controversy as to when the Anthropocene began, but I like that term, although most geologists have rejected it. So the question is whether we are living in the Holocene or whether we are living in the Anthropocene. But anyway, I do think that the concepts of old Stone Age, middle Stone Age, and new Stone Age are helpful. And I will be using the terms Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. There's also another term, it's kind of a long word, it's not that hard to figure out, but there's the Paleolithic, which is the Stone Age, and then there's what we call the Epipaleolithic. Epi meaning on the edge of. Epipaleolithic is what comes at the very end of the Paleolithic period, and it's the transition to the Mesolithic, and in some places a fairly quick transition into the Neolithic period. Okay, so the Paleolithic is the Ice Age, what happened during the Ice Age. The Mesolithic is hunters and gatherers. The Neolithic is people who were beginning to practice agriculture and live in villages. Okay, so those are, do you find those concepts pretty easy to understand, Jeff, in the way that I explained them?
Oh yeah, I mean, you only had almost 4 decades to perfect that, but yeah, right on.
Okay, well, the time period that you want to talk about, which is the time period from let's say the end of the Younger Dryas period and the end of the Ice Age, up until the first civilizations, that would correspond to the Mesolithic and the Neolithic. But it also includes a little bit of that Epipaleolithic bit. Okay, and the Epipaleolithic is when the first of the hunter-gatherers of Paleolithic began using, and this is where it gets a little complicated, began using plants and animals that would later become domesticated, but were still wild while they were using them. And we know from hindsight that sheep and goats and wheat and barley all became staples of Neolithic populations. But there was a time when all of those things were wild, and people begin the exploitation of wild species before those species ultimately become domesticated. When they become domesticated, we make the transition into what's called the Neolithic period. And I'll throw out a site name right off the bat because you mentioned it. Göbekli Tepe is one of the Taş Tepeler sites, means the stony hills, the Taş Tepeler sites in southeastern Turkey, of which there are now many. And Göbekli Tepe is a site that has very interesting archaeological features, but no evidence for the use of domesticated plants or animals. And that's one of the things that's made it so fascinating, is that it seems to have existed kind of right on the cusp, right on the verge of humans domesticating plants and becoming full-time farmers.
Right, and it's so attractive for all sorts of myth reasons, like it's like that Conan the Barbarian, sort of like the Odyssey. It's sort of like that time when gods were leaving and the demigods were fading away, but they were still magic alongside of us. And and as you know, that's been an industry that sort of still thrives today. Maybe never has thriven more. Is thriven a word? Let's leave it alone. And so we're not sure then if maybe we should identify what is the Younger Dryas and what is the general scientific consensus, other than being a time period that's useful or unuseful, because I'm not sure if it actually is a proper if it's not a diversion or if it's part of the story we're trying to talk about today.
Well, right off the bat, the term Dryas, Dryas, has nothing to do with dry. It's the name of the species of plant that appears in abundance during this particular geological episode. The Younger Dryas is a period of a sort of return to cold temperatures that happened just before the beginning of the Holocene, which begins at about 11,500 years ago. And it's a period during which there was a period of cooling before temperatures got warmer and the climate got wetter. And so it can sort of be seen as the last gasp of the Ice Age in some ways, when people were adapted to extremely cold climates, including during what we call the last glacial maximum, or LGM, at about 18,000 years ago, when most of Northern Europe was covered by glaciers. Most of North America, Northern North America, Canada, and the northern states were covered by glaciers. That was the last glacial maximum. And then it warms, and then it gets cold again, and then it gets warmer and wetter and stays that way.
Okay, so where is most of our evidence that we're going to be talking about today? Where I'm just going to call them proto-civilizations, though that's probably a little bit unfair, but proto-civilizations as compared to like Sumer and Egypt, that we know about. I mean, I'm going to go on the assumption that most of it is sort of in, that giant delta where, near Sumeria into Russia and,
Well,
around the
we have
Mediterranean.
the areas that have received the most attention, and not surprisingly, they're also the areas that are mentioned in the Bible, and therefore, given the popularity of the Bible for several major world religions, people look to the Bible as an important source on ancient history, and this is where it happened. Now, it's important to keep in mind that civilization emerged independently in several different parts of the world. It emerged in China. It emerged in what is now Pakistan. It emerged in Mexico, and it emerged in Peru, and also it emerged in parts of Europe. But the two areas that are best known, which are also the areas of the Bible, are the area between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and also the area of the Egyptian Nile Delta. So ancient Egypt, and then Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers. So the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates loom large and play a big part in our understanding of this ancient past. They're also the parts of the world in which we have the earliest evidence for domestication of plants and animals, and also for settled villages.
Isn't there evidence? I mean, I know there's the ongoing debate as to whether, wolves domesticated us, or, dogs domesticated us or we domesticated dogs, but that was, as I understand it, a long, long time ago. There was like 100,000 years ago, but like horses were game animals. They were herd animals. We used them for eating, basically, and hunting until about 10,000 years ago, or maybe less than that, maybe 7,000. I mean, I don't know, but
Somewhat less than that, but yeah.
and the horse domestication is sort of what led to the next step. But I'm not sure that would be. I mean, I imagine that things like goats and sheep and cows were domesticated first, maybe pigs and whatnot. But was this all in sort of we'll just call it the biblical lands in the Near East, or was some of it on the steppes? Was it in India? Other?
Well, that's an excellent question. You mentioned horses. Horses are domesticated on the steppes, which are farther to the east than the Tigris and the Euphrates. They're closer to areas of northern India and Pakistan, and that area north of the Black Sea. But sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs and other animal domesticates did happen in what was known as the Fertile Crescent, which is an area that includes the Eastern Mediterranean. It extends up into southern Turkey, which is probably one of the most important regions, and then over into areas of Iraq and Iran. And and actually, the Tigris and the Euphrates are a little bit south of the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent technically refers to areas where there was sufficient rainfall for people to practice agriculture without irrigation. But between the Tigris and the Euphrates, it's dry enough that you actually need irrigation in order to grow crops. And the transition from rainfall agriculture to irrigation agriculture is one of those things that accompanies the emergence of civilization. Now, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to talk about civilization because that is not a simple term. Civilization has been applied to all kinds of things, and in fact, my colleagues in Australia now talk about an Australian civilization that existed before the arrival of the Europeans. My colleagues in South America recently published an article in Nature about a newly named civilization in the Amazon rainforest. And so they're using the term civilization in ways that are much broader than what was being used in the 19th century, when basically there was a simple definition of civilization in the late 1800s, and that was they had to have a writing system. Okay, you had to have the ability to write down sounds and grammar and vocabulary and represent it with symbols. So for the late 19th century scholars, um, ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia, where you had hieroglyphic writing and cuneiform writing, and then China, where you had character writing, and then even the Indus Valley in Pakistan, where you had a writing system that we haven't yet been able to decipher, and then, of course, the ancient Mayas in Mexico and Central America. All of those qualified as civilizations because they had writing systems.
I understand that part, though I'm not sure if that's the. So I'm okay with using the word proto-civilization, and not a scientist. This is not a scientific journal, but to me, civilization, such as the proof of what's civilized and what's not civilized, philosophically aside, to me it meant that people basically lived in the same place year round. And that there were certain customs and cultures and rituals, probably a temple or temples in there, and farms and pens and some type of mutual defense arrangement. To me, that's a civilization. I mean, I've heard that, and this is probably wrong, but that Jericho is the oldest continuously inhabited city. In the something like for 7,000 years it's been, and I don't know if any of that is accurate or not.
No, that's pretty accurate, although it probably goes back farther than that.
Cool. Well, that's good. And Jericho, while not that far from the Fertile Crescent, I mean, it's very far in.
Oh, it's a part of the Fertile Crescent. It's the eastern. I mean, it's the western Fertile Crescent. So Jericho, which is now known as Tel Es Sultan, it's actually located in the West Bank, is considered part of the Fertile Crescent.
Oh, okay.
It's one of the defining sites of the Fertile Crescent, actually.
Okay, well then that makes a whole lot more sense. For whatever reason, I thought Jericho was south near where the Sinai. Anyway, not important.
No, it's in the West Bank, and for that reason has not gotten as much attention as it deserves, because it's an area that's contentious between the Israelis and Palestinians.
Yeah, and I'm sure if there were more people there, would be contentious between them as well.
and given all of the things that Palestinians have been dealing with, doing archaeology is not a high priority for them.
Yeah, no, I'm sure, and I'm sure that the people on the other side of it aren't helping with that at all, in the least. In any event, that's a different show. So I guess start where you like. I mean, if we're going to the end of the glacial maximum, and then we have the Paleocene going into the
Epipaleolithic,
and then we're going to the Mesolithic. Where
Yeah.
should our story start from there? Does it start in the Fertile Crescent, or does it start
it actually does start in the Fertile Crescent. It absolutely does. And there are several sites in what is now Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, Iraq, uh, Iran, all of which are relevant to understanding this story. Some of them, some of the most, some of those fascinating ones are on the shores of the Dead Sea, where there has been really excellent preservation of animal bones and other materials that can tell us about people settling in one place and intensively collecting plants and animals uh, right as the Ice Age was ending. I mean, this is like 13,000 years ago. So if people want to look at the best evidence for what was happening at this time in terms of the transition to what's called sedentism, which is living in a place year round, as opposed to migrating across the landscape, um, the origins of sedentism, and then agriculture, which is defined as the use of domesticated plants and animals. And that's a term people should know as well. Domesticated doesn't just mean taming things. Okay, you can tame a fox or you can tame a wolf, but that doesn't mean you've domesticated them. Domestication means that there have been physical, morphological, genetic changes that distinguish a domesticated species from a wild species. So, for example, dogs are the first known domesticated species. They became, as you mentioned, domesticated from wolves, uh, probably in Siberia, probably at the end of the Ice Age or towards the end of the Ice Age, and they were domesticated for the purposes of hunting. But dogs and wolves have very different behavior. They have different appearances. Uh, One of my colleagues who studied the domestication of dogs pointed out that one of the things that was selected for in dogs is that dogs are perpetually juvenile. That basically a wolf would look at a dog and recognize an adult dog as if it were a puppy, because dog behavior basically is extending puppy behavior through adulthood. So dogs remain puppy-like into adulthood, whereas a wolf would look at that and think, wait a minute, why is that adult dog acting like a puppy?
Stupid kids.
They would see them as strange and probably not very intelligent.
So they would be the entire Scooby Doo gang, not just Scooby Doo. To the
Yeah,
wolf.
something along those lines. But wolves, I've always pointed out, domestication never makes a species smarter. Okay, every domesticated species is less intelligent than its wild ancestor.
That's sad. All the dogs can do all the tricks and whatever, but yeah, living in the wild probably a bit of a struggle for them. I had read that every single dog that exists now, every single domesticated dog, can date back to a species of Eurasian wolf, which is now extinct. So even if you don't think that any dogs look like the wolves that exist now, that might be the reason why. Though, I mean, things like Malamutes and Huskies sure look a lot like modern wolves to me.
Yeah, they look well. Dogs are either closer or farther away from wolves, depending on how much breeding has been done. And as we all know, it requires human breeding to keep those different breeds of dog separate, because dogs will have sex with any other dog, at least to the extent that they can. I mean, a Chihuahua and a Great Dane are not really going to get it on that easily, but they're interfertile. They could have an offspring if someone could manage to impregnate a Great Dane with a Chihuahua or the other way around.
Someone
Um,
can, and someone probably is.
but anyway, my point is that domestication changes a species on the basis of human selection, which can be intentional or sometimes it can be unintentional. And in fact, some theories are that some plants became domesticated simply by humans collecting them over a long period of time. Um, for example, there's some ideas that the domestication of corn, of maize, may have been unintentional, that people were collecting it and eating the kernels, and then humans became seed dispersers. Um, and I don't want to get into this too much, but humans disperse corn kernels
Sure,
by pooping them out.
sure.
And so humans would collect the corn, and we refer to it as maize to distinguish it from corn, because technically the word corn can also be a barley corn or it can be a wheat grain. So we typically use the term maize to say we're not talking about wheat or barley. We're talking about this what we call corn. But anyway, can be growing in a particular patch, and humans will collect it, and then they will range across the landscape and deposit the seeds in manure, which will later grow. And humans may not realize what they're doing, but simply by consuming a plant and dispersing the seeds, they are participating in its domestication. And if they do it long enough, then the plant can become domesticated.
So accidental trial and error led to it. You see all of a sudden corn stalks growing where you walked 6 months earlier, and you're like, hmm. But someplace maybe the ground wasn't hardy enough for corn or wheat or barley or whatever it was, and they didn't grow there. And maybe those accidents led to people coming back and saying, "You can stay here."
Yeah, well, people living in a rock shelter in Mexico, for example, and collecting early corn, would discard their seeds and cobs and things like that outside the cave. And so it shouldn't be surprising that over time you get more and more of it growing outside the cave. So this whole role between humans as seed dispersers and humans as collectors becomes a really important thing. But
Also,
actually,
some of their animals, I mean, things like dogs, and I imagine later pigs and goats and sheep who eat anything probably did the same.
yeah, well, and our ability to domesticate those is something that comes from what their behavior has been. Um, and another example is turkeys. We talk about turkeys self-domesticating because turkeys found it advantageous to hang out around human communities, and then humans would hunt and eat the turkeys. But it was kind of a symbiotic relationship, which over time resulted in domesticated turkeys.
It was a symbiotic relationship. I wonder if, I mean, turkeys could learn that it was helpful, but that they don't learn regret, I guess, is something that we've learned.
Well, or they're not smart enough to keep away and keep from being hunted. But another interesting head scratcher, which we haven't been able to answer very well, is given the long relationship between humans and deer, why did deer not become domesticated?
That's
Now,
it.
there's some speculation that the Aztecs may have actually been trying to domesticate deer, but the domestication of deer never happened, even though they're very common around human communities in North America.
But reindeer I mean, reindeer are just
Yes.
non-wild
Well,
caribou. So,
caribou. Yes, that's right. Caribou are domesticated. That's correct. That's exactly right. But the American white-tailed deer is not domesticated.
I mean, I understand that Santa did that, and he's magical, so
Right.
it's it falls into the exception. So, I mean,
But the whole part of whole issue of domestication of foods is a really fascinating one because what was the last thing that you ate that was wild, that was not domesticated? You may eat wild salmon, you may eat wild tuna. It's mostly most of the wild things we eat are seafoods, whether it's shrimp or scallops or lobsters or whatever. But practically everything else that we eat is the result of domestication. Um,
probably probably seafood now too. Probably most of it comes from water farms. I mean, here
well,
in Maryland, probably crabs and oysters are still wild. I guess we
that's
don't
that's
consider.
that's right, but we may get to the point where they're being managed so carefully that they actually become a domesticated species.
Oh yeah, up and down the East Coast and probably the West Coast too. That's a giant thing about the battle between conservation and farmers. Well, not farmers, so fishermen and seamen and oystermen and all that, and what's sustainable. What's in their long term interest, but I got to eat now kind of thing. Um, and that's where companies like Colossal Biogenics probably comes into, and cloning and all of that stuff on that. Which at some point I need to find some sort of expert on that, but
It's a great topic, and the question of what are going to be the next big domesticates is a really interesting question as well. I've thought for a long time that the next big transition in human cuisine is going to be when we start eating lots of bugs, because lots of insects are very easy to produce. You can produce them in very large quantities. They generate a lot of protein, and if you can process insects to make them palatable into basically a protein that you could make into something like a hamburger or a steak or whatever, It's very, very easy to grow lots and lots and lots of insects. So that may be the next frontier in food.
Wow, that is a little bit scary. Listen, I'm all about water insects, like mass produce those shrimp, lobster, and crabs. That sounds good to me. Some crawdaddies for those of you down in the bayou. Um, but yeah,
Yeah,
so
but crabs and lobsters are basically great big bugs, right? They're like
right,
big spiders or something like that.
that's right. I'm going with my sea bugs. I'm hoping to mass produce those, and hopefully the prices come down. It's
Yeah.
this is called Jeff Care for bringing the prices down on delicious seafood. Anyway, so let's get to some of the names of peoples, where they were, where they were, who they met, or how we know where they came from and where they stopped. And maybe you've touched on it already by naming parts of the world, but let's give these. I'm just going to call them tribes at this point. Names.
Okay. Um, well, I think an important concept, if we want to talk about Göbekli Tepe, for example, is the concept of the Neolithic, and the fact that the Neolithic is divided into several, different segments. The first part of the Neolithic, the very first part of the Neolithic, is called the pre-pottery Neolithic A. And there's basically, it's descriptive. Pre-pottery Neolithic means it was before they had invented pottery. They were not making pottery. So agriculture comes before pottery. And we have a pre-pottery Neolithic A, pre-pottery Neolithic B, and pre-pottery Neolithic C, which are then followed by the pottery Neolithic. And there are a lot of different names that are given to different peoples and cultures that are producing different kinds of pottery. But among the things that archaeologists have been able to work out for particular parts of the world is, what came first? Did people make houses first and then do agriculture, or were they practicing agriculture and then they built houses? And then once they had the houses, did they, how soon did they make pottery? Obviously, pottery is a huge innovation in technology, because pottery makes it possible to basically detoxify food that has started to go bad. It allows you to extract a lot more from that gazelle that you've killed. When you can boil something, you can make soups and stews. The other thing that pottery allows you to do, and actually people learned this fairly early on, it allows you to make beer and fermented beverages and alcoholic beverages. So pottery and the invention of pottery and the consumption of beer sort of go hand in hand. Um, and then, pottery also plays a very important role in demographics, because being able to boil something and soften it makes it possible to turn it into a weaning food to feed babies, like cream of wheat or cream of rice or something like that. But it also makes it easy to prepare foods that old people can eat. And if you're keeping more babies and more old people alive, then your population grows. And that's actually probably one of the reasons for the biggest, population growth during the Neolithic, was the ability to feed babies and old people and have more people survive.
Two things strike me, and I don't know if this is just again a person being wrong, or maybe I'm hitting something. But it also seems to me that pottery is a fairly easy way to store things and to engage in trade, because you can carry it around and give gifts to your neighbors. And maybe you've got the corn, but they've got the barley, or they've got dates, and you've got, I don't know, apples, whatever.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And, a lot of people today in the United States get really discombobulated if the electricity goes out and the refrigerator doesn't work. Just imagine living without a refrigerator, which people did for millions of years.
Right.
If you want to preserve food, that dead gazelle or
Unless you lived in the
that
refrigerator in
sheep or
the
that
Arctic.
goat is not going to keep very long. How are you going to preserve that meat? Well, one way to do it is to dry it and make jerky. Another way to do it is to salt it and make a salted meat. Another way is to pickle it in vinegar. And another way is just to keep boiling it, keeping it edible for as long as you can. And pottery allows you to do all of those things. Pottery helps you to preserve meat, but it also allows you to preserve grains from harvests. I mean, one of the main reasons for making beer is the harvest time comes and you've got all of this wheat and all of this barley, and there's only so much bread you can make. But if the ground up flour gets a little bit wet and it has some yeast in it, it then begins to ferment, and what becomes the basis for our daily bread is also the basis for our daily beer. And the reason I'm mentioning this is not to be facetious about beer at all, but I think Göbekli Tepe, which is this really amazing settlement in southeastern Turkey, was basically a place where people went to get beer and barbecue. Um, during the harvest times, during the times when those resources were the most abundant, is when people knew that they could go and they could get a lot of gazelle meat, and they knew that they could get a lot of fermented wheat beverages, and it basically became party time.
So so what we're saying is Göbekli Tepe is the original Texas. Okay, very good. Or might have been, but beer is part of rituals, and beer and like psychedelics is tied into so many religions, and that it certainly makes a lot of sense.
Well, and if
I
you got
also
grapes growing, you can make wine. So the wine comes in and becomes really important too.
Yeah, you can make alcohol out of pretty much anything, and we have. We've got, I mean,
Well, if you leave your orange juice sitting out of the refrigerator long enough, it'll start to get foamy, but it also gets alcoholic. That's an alcoholic beverage.
yuck. But I also imagine that, like,
It's an acquired taste.
that's right. I mean, you could store your seeds and whatever in your tent or your yurt or your girt or whatever, but unless you had pottery there, the rats and the mice and whatever are getting into it, whatever your local vermin is.
That's
Um,
exactly right. With some fiber, you can seal up a pot, and the critters won't get into it.
okay. So, all right. So, I mean, obviously, there were no names like Sumerian yet. There were no names like Israelite then. There were no names like Hittite yet, or whatnot. Or if there were, we don't know. So, and again, we've given these groups names. We don't know what their own names were, and they're usually named for the places of first discovery or confirmation or whatever. So, like, if you discover a planet, you get to name it. It's one of those things. So, who are, like, I've heard words like Yamani and Natufian, and I'm sure I'm botching both of those.
No,
Uh,
you got this right.
really? Wow. Well, look at me. Okay. Well, are they in this story? Are they the oldest part of the story, or am I dropping us into the middle of the story and there's a better
Well,
place?
until Göbekli Tepe came along, the Natufians were the earliest. It was the Natufian level at Jericho that helped to define the very beginning of the pre-pottery Neolithic. And among the things we knew about Natufians is that they built houses that they lived in year round. They had cemeteries where they had prepared graves that they put their dead into. Um, they had jewelry. They made small carvings out of bone. Um, uh, all of those things are kind of leading to what becomes something we can recognize as civilization. And actually, my own working definition for civilization is just two words. It's like us. When we can recognize that these people were like us, then we begin to recognize that they're on the path to civilization.
Okay. Well, I know that recently they've discovered, like, some monkeys starting to use Stone Age tools, and there might be some monkeys or apes entering the Stone Age theoretically, and like using the tools for more than one purpose or whatever, which is kind of cool. I don't know if it's right or not, but nobody knows. We'll know in 300 years, I guess, if they're still doing it and passing it on. All right. So the Tufians, basically West Bankish, so Israel, Jordan, that part of the world.
Yeah, that part of the world, and a part of the world that's sometimes referred to as the Levant, Levant, which basically means the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean.
Yeah, a very, very useful place. Crossroads of the world from early on, which is probably why it remains so important. It's just, the out of Africa a few times, and there you go. The first stop, out of the Sinai Desert,
Right.
there you are. And then you find
That's
some,
right.
usable rivers and lakes, and there you go. And
Well,
then
and
the
once you
next,
get into the highlands, it's the areas in Lebanon and Syria and southern Turkey. Those are the highlands where the sheep and goats live.
are those the
So people are
Dakra
first
or are they
hunting the
the
sheep and
Golan Heights?
goats.
What are those areas called now?
Well, they're called Lebanon, Syria, Turkey, and Iraq. They're also sometimes referred to as Kurdistan because it's the land of the Kurds. And in fact, I have a hunch, and this is something that can be controversial in that part of the world, but I think the ancestors of the Kurds may be one of the keys to understanding the emergence of civilization. Now, the Kurds are an ethnic group and a linguistic group that occupies parts of Turkey, parts of Syria, parts of Iraq, but they don't have their own country. The Kurds have sort of been pushed out of a lot of places and often get the short end of the stick. But I suspect that it was the ancestors of the Kurds who may have been playing a critical role in the origins of civilization
Well,
because they
cheap
were in
plug
the right
for myself.
place at the right time.
Cheap plug for myself. I have two somewhat competing shows on the Kurds. One, the guest is Mike Hilliard from the Red Line podcast, and the other is Darius Kamali from the Persian Version. He's also a filmmaker as well. But Mike Hilliard, the Red Line podcast, is the best geopolitical podcast in the world. And how he's been on this show 6 times, I have no idea. But I still know how John's been on this show 6 times. I guess I'm charming. Who knows? But in any event, you can check those out if you want to learn more about the Kurds. And Mike's was for more of a geopolitical, and Darius, who is part Persian and is very invested in the, not that Mike isn't, but more personally, has a somewhat different view of the Kurds. So you get two different perspectives, which is what I like to do here by hook or by crook. So anyway,
Yeah.
the precursors for the Kurds, but we don't have they weren't calling themselves the Kurds then, and certainly the term Stan, I think, is Stan an Islamic term, or is it something that predates Islam, as sort of saying the land of?
I'm not a historical linguist, and I could not say, but there are a lot of stands. Pakistan, Kurdistan. Actually, Kurdistan's not a country; it's just a general region. But Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all of that. I don't know where the root stan comes from, but it obviously means something along the lines of an ethnic territory.
Yeah, land of is what I call it. There's other non-countries, like there's Dagestan, which is an area, but a lot of these are self-autonomous, and part of Kurdistan is self-autonomous, but other parts of Kurdistan are absolutely not self-autonomous. It's quite a thing. Anyway, so
But
what were
that's the critical part of the world for animal domestication, at least for sheep and goats. The Zagros
were
Mountains and the Taurus Mountains, because that's where the wild sheep and wild goats were. And actually, if you go back far enough, it's kind of hard to tell the difference between a sheep and a goat because they're so morphologically similar.
right?
But they were bred and kept for different purposes. Goats became an important source of milk as well as meat, and sheep, of course, became an important source of fur, of wool.
Right. What do we call those people that occupied that area? What name do we put upon them?
Well, as I said, pre-pottery Neolithic A and pre-pottery Neolithic B would be the archaeological terms that refer to those people at that time in that place.
Oh, so we don't even give them a cool tribe name like the Proto Turkey or whatever. Or I don't
Well,
know.
Natufians comes pretty close. If you look up Natufians, that is, one of the names that archaeologists have given them. But it's not their own name. It comes from an archaeological site called Wadi El Natuf, which is the first place this culture was recognized. So anything after that became Natufian,
And
which
wadis are
basically
sort of like
means
dried up
looks
valleys.
like Natuf.
Yeah, aren't wadis like sort of dried up valleys where there's a river that occasionally fills up again, but is often dry, but it's
That's right.
always
A wadi is a source of fresh water.
yeah. Okay. So it's like a mini oasis, I suppose. Or no, or
Right.
maybe a
Correct.
maxi oasis. I think I have those things backwards. So, all right. So this other people that I've mentioned that you said is a real name or close enough, the Yamani, where and when were they?
Well, again, that I don't know what the history of that particular linguistic term is, but my understanding is that they extend back into the Neolithic, principally in the steppes and the plains north of the Caspian Sea, and that they become a very important linguistic and cultural group that kind of lays the foundations for spreading agriculture from that part of the world westward. Ultimately, it's populations from that part of the world with both linguistic and cultural and genetic roots. I mean, that we now know something about Yamani genetics, that we can recognize these populations were ones that were essentially the bearers of agriculture or the spreaders of agriculture as it moved farther and farther west into Central Europe, Western Europe, Northern Europe, etc.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people just assume that everything came out of Africa and migrated unilaterally in whatever directions they went into. So basically from west to east. But actually, as my understanding is that many, if not all, of the peoples of Asia into the Near East now actually came out of like parts of Western and Northern China, and came. I mean, we think of China as we think of how Chinese people present today, but and maybe they did, but like the Turks and the and all and the Iranians and all of the sort of the actual original Aryan peoples and sort of were actually coming from the east and back west again,
Right.
and they use
And
the step.
a lot of that is related to the domestication of the horse, as well as the domestication of cattle, and eventually the use of oxen to roll carts and chariots and things like that. Obviously, wheeled vehicles greatly increased mobility. So as people developed the draft animals that could draw the vehicles, that helped with population movements as well. Um, there's a hypothesis called the Kurgan hypothesis, Kurgan, and people may be interested in reading about the Kurgans, who were basically named for building these large burial mounds, but they appear to have also been involved in the westward spread of Indo-European languages that then become the foundation of many of the languages of Europe. Not all, but many. But it's complicated. There were also people spreading by sea along the Mediterranean coasts. So we find an early occupation of Cyprus and Crete. The islands in the Mediterranean are pretty difficult to get to, but people managed to make boats and get out there. And there's a Neolithic occupation on Crete, for example. And then people having these boats moved along the shores of the Mediterranean and along Greece and Italy and Spain, and then eventually up into France along the Spanish and the French coasts, and then all the way up to the UK. So you have people moving by land, following mostly the river valleys, but you also have people spreading by sea. So it's important to keep that in mind. And those included cultures that we refer to as the linear pottery culture. Linear Keramik was the German term, but there's a linear pottery culture, and then there's also something called the cardial ware culture, because they made pottery that was that was decorated with say that again, pottery that was direct decorated with the shells of a species called or a genus called Cardium, So they would use a particular seashell for stamping on the outsides of their pots, and that became known as cardial ware. And so there were cardial ware peoples named for their pottery, who spread along the coasts. And then from those, we get cultures like the funnel beaker people, who were among the first ones to reach the UK and build megalithic monuments. They had been preceded, of course, by Mesolithic populations. And there were even, the first populations of the UK go all the way back into the lower Paleolithic, but they were displaced by the ice ages and things like that. But people were moving around a lot. Okay, that's the story of the world. It's migration. People moving from one place to the next, and multi-ethnic communities have been around for 10,000 years. You don't just get one ethnic group in one place. You get lots of people speaking different languages with different beliefs and religious practices, different ways of doing things, including pottery and textile. It really is a big mix and complicated mixed bag, which is what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, I mean, nothing is ever simple, and as I've tried to say, even the names, again, we've made up these names based on geographic areas that, again, were named much later, probably than.
Right. Well, as I said, we also make up these names, such as cardial ware, based on their pottery styles.
Right.
Or we'll make up a term like funnel beaker for the type of pots that they make. And we come up with these names that become kind of a convenient way to talk about them. But because they did not have written records, because they were prehistoric, we don't know what they called themselves, and we just come up with names to make it convenient to discuss them, as we study them and as we identify archaeological sites and artifacts and other things that are associated with them.
Yeah, and also as as the Kurgans go, I mean, first of all, the Kurgan in Highlander was absolutely named after the Kurgan of the mounds. Though I have been told Kyrgyzstan is not related to the word Kurgan that we're talking about, another stan that's out there. But rank speculation that this Kurgan mound building not only head west, but also head east, because we have mound builders all through the Americas, Cahokia, Hopewell, what's that called? The Snake Mound. But I don't know.
Serpent Mound in Ohio. Yeah.
And of course, everybody in the Americas, at least originally came from the Asias, or Asia. But that doesn't mean that more than one people couldn't be doing mounds. But is there any trying to tie the Kurgans to Native Americans, or no?
No, that seems extremely unlikely. There isn't any genetic evidence. The chronology is completely different. The Kurgans were thousands of years before most of these mounds were being made in North America and South America. And I should mention, one of the most exciting things that's happening right now is the use of LiDAR to identify tens of thousands of mounds in Amazonia, in South America. For a long time, people thought that the rainforests of Brazil were occupied only by hunters and gatherers. We now know that's not true. They were mound builders of the Amazon, and they were building these great big, circles and rectangles and enclosures, many of which were probably oriented to making astronomical observations of the sun or the moon or other events. They may have been used as defensive structures. They may have been used as ritual structures for dances or ceremonies, gathering places, things like that. But there are literally tens of thousands of these mound sites with mounded earthworks, in Brazil, in Peru, in Bolivia, and a lot of this is now coming to light, partly as a result of deforestation, which is the cutting down of the rainforest, which is a sad thing that is happening very rapidly. But part of it is also happening because of this new technology called LiDAR, which allows us to look through the forest and see the surface of the ground, and that allows us to map these things.
That is really interesting. I also don't want to give short shrift to the Minoan civilization, which is also, I believe, a name that we gave to it. I'm sure nobody has any idea what name they gave themselves. But one thing about them is that they had structures. They had huge complexes, which are, probably palaces and temples and maybe multi-use centers, which is something that's been extrapolated to maybe being for Göbekli Tepe. I mean, there's probably thousands of years there, but also they didn't have walls, which seems to be one of two things. One, they felt that the being on an island protected them, but they got there. Or two, that their high point was sort of before everybody was busy invading each other. Like or I guess C, they were really smart to do that, and they were either full of pride and not so, but they had a big blind spot, either which came first. But
well, they were doing their thing, even before the Mycenaeans, and as I mentioned, Crete has a Neolithic occupation, so there were people on that island very early on, and Minoan civilization sort of emerges from that. But you're right, it was named on the basis of mythology. King Minos and the Minotaur basically were lending their story to interpreting these ruins, where Sir Arthur Evans in around 1900 recognized Minoan civilization and kind of gave it a name, and it was sort of as with Troy and as with the Odyssey and as with other types of things. He realized that maybe the story of Theseus and the Minotaur had some elements of historical reality in it. So that's how he named the Minoan civilization and began excavating it and describing it and studying it.
Sure, if you want to get attention to something, you give it a catchy name, and what's catchier than a Minotaur? So
yeah, exactly.
Top that. I mean, there even was one in Doctor Strange 2, which still has never been adequately explained to me. Anyway, so but the city Knossos, was that their name, or is that a name that we sort of made up as well?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know when the name Knossos was first applied, or what it means. I'm not a classical archaeologist by specialty, so I don't know these details that friends of mine who work in ancient Greece certainly would.
Fair enough. They had their own, but they did have their own writing. But as I understand it, we have not yet translated that writing either.
I seem to remember seeing something online a couple of weeks ago about a major breakthrough in the decipherment of linear A. So, I don't want to say because I haven't reviewed that, but we may be on the verge of being able to read it.
I've heard one of the things people talk about AI is that AI will be able to translate these ancient languages that we haven't been able to do, which is very exciting, but it's also, how do we know if it's right or not? I mean, I imagine there are certain markers and patterns and grammatical structures, and you probably look to similar regions and genealogies to try to see how the people are, and when you can actually trace an actual language or languages and use that to, I guess, retrofit and try to make logical sense of it. I guess the AI can do that.
That's exactly how it works. Doctoral dissertations will be written in which people make their, strongest possible arguments, and then we'll see whether a scholarly consensus emerges out of that. But yeah, that's how it works.
I hope so. Yes, because I hate to think that these are hallucinations, and and they just give us a different, somewhat different version of the, Enuma Elish, or Anunnaki mythos or whatnot. I mean, it'd be cool. It's just someone's got to figure out if what these things, spewing out of these machines are correct or not. And I know they're going to cure cancer and all that, but that's what the doctor in Caprica said, 25 years ago.
Right. Well, I don't know whether you've been following the news about the ancient library of Herculaneum. People all the time know about the destruction of the library of Alexandria.
Yeah.
But there was a library in a city called Herculaneum, which was sort of a sister city of Pompeii. It's not quite as well known as Pompeii because it was actually a more elite occupation, and it was not excavated as thoroughly. In fact, a lot of it was covered by a very heavy volcanic ash that made it more difficult to excavate. But there was a library there in which the scrolls were charred and carbonized. And they have now been able to figure out how to use a combination of kind of an MRI type imaging and AI to actually read these Roman scrolls from AD 79 when Herculaneum was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius. And we now have potentially hundreds, if not thousands, of new ancient Roman texts that we can read. And they're probably not just ancient Roman texts, because Herculaneum was a very cosmopolitan place. So they're probably Hebrew texts, they're probably Greek texts, and texts in a variety of other languages. But just imagine being able to read a scroll that was completely charred in a volcanic eruption 2,000 years ago, and you can figure out how to read the letters on it.
That would be great.
Without unrolling it. I mean, this is the thing, they can't unroll it because it's too fragile. It just will, fall into dust. But by using imaging, they can actually kind of read a scroll without unrolling it.
This is fantastic. So a whole lot of things hopefully will be discovered, rediscovered, reinterpreted, different translations or different versions of books or things that we know, but maybe
well, and AD 79 was such a fascinating time because it was less than 10 years after the destruction of the Second Temple.
Yeah.
So there were people walking around who had seen that happen and probably wrote stuff down about it.
Right. And you also hope that things that were in the Library of Alexandria, there was more than one copy, and maybe this is a place that had more than one copy. I know all the thoughts about the Vatican Library hiding all of these things, and maybe they are. I don't know, but I'm never going to find out, at least not directly, and probably not indirectly either. But so something like this discovery is very hopeful, for anticipatory, and it also gives hope that maybe there's other places that will be discovered with other libraries also. Because one of the history's great crimes is the burning of the Library of Alexandria. And like some people go, what would you change if you could go back in history? And how do you pick what to do? But from a information as to the world as it was and prior to that, stopping the burning, the destruction of the Library of Alexandria is one of them. And what good or other consequences would have flowed from that, who knows? People's like, you wouldn't stop the Holocaust, you wouldn't stop the slave trade. I'm like, yeah, I'd like to stop all of them, but I don't. But I don't know. What change will. But it seems to me that the thing that's least likely to change the entire flow of history to now, but I could still live in Maryland, the United States, and in air conditioning is reversing the burning of the Library of Alexandria. And maybe we would have all been smarter to have preserved all that information, but I have no idea.
Well, the key, of course, Jeff, is that people need to learn languages other than English, because these scrolls were not written in English. They were written in Latin, they were written in Greek, they were written in Hebrew, they were written in a variety of ancient languages. And, it's one thing to find the library, and the Library of Herculaneum is going to be amazing, potentially amazing, but someone has to be able to read those texts. So I would really strongly encourage people who are interested in ancient languages to get on it. Brush up your Babylonian, study Sumerian, learn how to read Egyptian hieroglyphs, learn Roman and learn Latin and Greek and Hebrew and all these things that you need to know, because we're going to have stuff that needs to be read.
Old Greek, Coptic, Old Ge'ez, Old Hebrew. Don't go to Hebrew school now. But maybe go to Hebrew school now, but you have to then go back, and it's like knowing English now, but also learning how to understand Shakespeare and then Chaucer and the things in between
or
as well.
Beowulf. Beowulf is very difficult to read in the original, but it was written in English.
It sure is. But once you read it, you realize it's a very typical story. It's and deserves its own deep dive as well. One of the repeat guests on the show, J.J. Johnson from Southern Demonology, actually does speak and read many of those languages. So, J.J., you're about to become a very busy and possibly wealthy or better compensated man. I don't know. I hope. Fingers crossed.
That would be nice. We need to pay these people who do it.
Yeah. Don't forget the little people. I'm little. That's me, little. So are there any names of groups that we've given that we haven't paid any attention to or haven't gone to that people should sort of at least know their names and where they were, and sort of when they were and how they influenced they? I mean, I get the feeling that the Yamani are sort of like the precursors to, maybe what people call the Hurrians, the Hittites, the Scythians,
Well, among the ones that I find most intriguing are groups like, and these are all named after archaeological sites. The Hassunans, Hassunans, who are named after a tell called Hassuna in in Syria. The Halafins, named after a place called Tel El Halaf. And then the Samarans, Samarrans, who come from a region called Samara. And one of the principal archaeological sites is a place called Tel Es Sawan. And these, for me, are especially interesting because they are pre-Uruk Mesopotamians. The sort of the Mesopotamian pattern of what becomes the Sumerians. A lot of it begins in northern Mesopotamia, the northern Tigris and northern Euphrates region, especially the northern Euphrates. And then, of course, it blooms in southern Mesopotamia, where you get the Ubaid culture and the Uruk culture, and the emergence of what we can recognize as ancient Sumerian civilizations. But it was these pre-Sumerian civilizations in Mesopotamia that I think are really, really fascinating.
Is Samara still the place that's called Samara today?
I believe so.
Okay. But does it have any connection to the Samaritan, sort of the semi-Christian sect?
No, that's a different group.
Okay, that's based on the word Samaritan, more or less how we understand it today.
And then another group that also merits much more consideration is the Tripilia Cucuteni culture. Trypillia hyphen Cucuteni.
Are they
And that's
from Tripoli, like Lebanon, or Tripoli, Libya, or
no,
neither?
no. They're from Romania
Oh,
and Ukraine, and areas of Eastern Europe. They were a very fascinating Neolithic culture of Eastern Europe. And what makes them so fascinating is that some of their settlements, including a place called Nebelivka, and another is called Talianki, are identified as potential early cities that were as large in population as Uruk in southern Mesopotamia, at around 5000 BCE.
and Uruk sounds familiar because that is the basis of the word Iraq, which is a country now.
Actually, I'm not completely sure of that etymology, but Uruk is named in the Bible as Erech, Erech. So another name for it is Warka, Warka. But Uruk was traditionally identified as the place where the first major city emerged and the first major temple of southern Mesopotamia emerged.
Okay, I have another phonetic thing to ask you to see if this is true or this is just complete myth. This is the pseudoscience. Yes, Eridu, I believe, is also sort of at the base of the delta there, Tigris and Euphrates, the
That's
Persian
correct.
delta, and Eridu is also, pre-Sumeria, but maybe post as well. But apparently, it means Earth, and that's where we get the word Earth for the planet from the word Eridu, or the place Eridu.
I'm not so sure about that.
Okay.
I'd have to check the etymology on it, but
Okay.
Earth, of course, is an English word which I think I can't remember whether it comes from a Proto-Indo-European root or not. I
Okay.
think it's Northern European, but I don't know. I'm the wrong person to ask about that.
Okay. I mean, these are
But
just things
Eridu was
like
the
here that
location of
they.
something called the
Yeah.
Ubaid culture, which was a pre-Uruk culture in southern Mesopotamia, and it's also really pretty fascinating too. I mean, for me, the whole Neolithic of Mesopotamia is really interesting, And the corresponding period in Egypt is what's called the pre-dynastic. In Egypt, they call it the pre-dynastic. In Mesopotamia, they call it the early Neolithic.
We're going to get back to in a second. I just want to, people are probably wondering why this comment's been on stage. It says my ex was cuckoo. I don't know exactly what that's referring to in the show, but the important thing is the poster. That's my best friend, Mr. Thomas, erstwhile of MLW Wrestling, the godfather of the Boomaya Fight Club. So in his own way, telling me that he's watching this show, which I think is unprecedented. I don't know if he's trying to say that his ex is from the Minoan culture or Natufians or what it was, or if he's trying to tell me secretly that he's in the film and
Well,
has
I mentioned the Cucuteni culture, Cucuteni. Maybe his wife is Cucuteni,
that's
ex-wife.
not, well, we say not to be confused with cuckoo. He was making a little pun. I've been a bad influence on him. A year and a half ago, he would never make a stupid joke like that. All of his jokes would hit hard, just like he hits hard. He's in Iowa right now, not too far from you, I guess, in the way that Iraq is not too far from the shores of the Mediterranean. And if you're at the Iowa State Fair, apparently he's there, ready to meet you or fight you or both.
That's great. Well, either one. I'll fight him too.
Oh, that's a
but
bad idea.
I'm currently in Asheville, North Carolina, and not my usual digs in Kansas.
All right. Well, the folks out there, book it. You heard it. 6'5", 263 pounds of Mr. Thomas versus 5'10". I'm not going to say his weight of Professor Emeritus John Hups, coming soon. What is this person saying? What is Rams fan talking about my attire? Jeff looks like a picnic. You know what? This is a Croatian soccer jersey, but you're not wrong. I do look like a pizza cloth or a strangely colored checkers board. All right, we're going to stop with me. So these people, are there any peoples that we know of, like in Africa, that are Proto-Egyptian? I mean, I know I did a show with one of your colleagues
plenty, lots and lots. I'm not a specialist in African archaeology by a long shot, but it really is very fascinating. And among the things that tend to get overlooked, which I try to bring attention back to, is that the earliest iron metallurgy was actually in Central Africa. The Egyptians probably were relative latecomers to that. But Africans were forging iron before anybody else in areas of Congo and also farther west into Nigeria. But iron technology begins in Central Africa.
I am not at all, not even a little bit surprised by that. I would probably be surprised to learn anything else. I agree with Graham Hancock and all the others that there is a root culture, or there's a root to a lot of the stories that we have. I just think that the root is probably the peoples from Africa who went out of Africa. Some of those stories translated and morphed, and that's why so many stories have this, some things that you can look at and are very similar around the world. I don't think it's because we are pre-wired that way with archetypes. I don't think it's because it was a super culture like Atlantis. I mean, I fully see that some civilizations, advanced decades or a couple of hundred years beyond the others, but not like, one is like modern, U.S. with aircraft carriers and stuff versus others living in huts.
One of the things I think is especially cool about iron technology originating in Africa is think about a blacksmith shop. Okay, think about what a blacksmith shop sounds like. Okay, lots of hammering on iron. Okay, yeah. Lots of hammering on iron, often with a rhythmic hammering, something that is done in order to to work the metal. And where do the most complex polyrhythmic musical traditions come from? It's Central Africa. It's probably not an accident. And actually, I wonder. I'm not an ethnomusicologist, but I wonder whether Afropop and African beats and all of the African polyrhythmic music emerges from a tradition of ironworking and making bells and gongs and just working the metal would create that sort of drumming and beating and sound tradition, which is at the roots of reggae and Latin music and everything else. So anyway, that's an interesting thing to think about, is the origins of musical traditions, because the musical traditions of Africa are quite different from those of China or the Americas or Europe. And I think that music is going to be related to technology. That's kind of a no-brainer. Your music sounds like the instruments that you have to play.
We got Thomas sticking around, and Africans always have this is fantastic. This is great. I can't wait till the entire Boomerang Fight Club and the entire MLW roster and everyone else starts listening to the show, and everyone getting smarter. Silas Mason, see what you're missing? And AJ Kazana, you too. Anyway, no, I think that's a really fascinating theory, and it was obviously applied afterwards to people who rode, ships, like warships and fishing ships and trading ships, with the stroke, the drum beat. And I guess also
Yeah, well,
how
that's
armies
actually
march.
an epiphany that I had when listening to the recitation of the Odyssey in the original Greek. And I don't know whether this is going to hold up with Greek historians or not, but it seemed to me like the length of one of Homer's verses was about the length that it would take to row an oar stroke on a trireme. So that you could actually, so that the Odyssey may actually have been sung as something to keep people in rhythm on the boat as they were rowing across the Mediterranean. But
Well,
the
also
so
engage,
many
keep your
music
mind off
traditions
of
come
it.
from.
But yeah, I like that theory. You said you're not an ethnomusicologist?
My son-in-law is an ethnomusicologist, but I'm not. It's an interest of mine, but I've never done any scholarship on it.
Well, maybe you should collaborate now in your retirement, because I know you're going to not. I mean, no professors actually retire quietly. It's just
No,
not.
we keep doing what we do. I'm just not going to be teaching courses anymore.
But I don't know any ethnomusicologists. I never heard that term until today. So as of today, I'm claiming I am an ethnomusicologist, because there's very few people out there who can prove me wrong. Apparently, though, your son-in-law can, but he's welcome to come on the show and tell me what an ethnomusicologist actually does. And
Well,
and
ethnomusicologists are amazing. I just look into it, but it has to do with understanding music traditions. And actually, my son-in-law wrote his dissertation about Afro-Colombian music in northern Colombia, and he was able to trace a diaspora in Colombia that had originated in West Africa, and that the current DJs have sort of a flow of music that goes between New York and Colombia that informs them about West Africa. So there's the whole transatlantic music exchange that keeps music traditions alive in South America. But it's just fascinating stuff, including, and again, we're getting kind of way off topic, but things like the chain gangs of the South, and the people chopping wood and chopping down forests were creating uh, these rhythmic chants that
the
turned
railroad.
into the blues and rock and roll. I mean, that's where rock and roll comes from. It has its roots in the music that people chanted and sang while they were doing really hard work.
I heard it came from the devil when he met Robert Johnson on Crossroads. So,
No,
uh, okay, I don't know.
but Johnson was
Agree to
amazing.
disagree. Definitely devil's work. Okay, so you named a lot of peoples, and then you did tell them where they were. So it is, mostly around that Fertile Crescent. So what people might call Anatolia, or let's just call it the Mediterranean Levant, into area, which is really cool. But even northwards up into sort of Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Russia, European Georgia, I mean, obviously the borders were different. There were no borders. Maybe
Right.
if there were borders, they were enforced, through,
Yeah, but the world is a big place, and there was a lot of really cool stuff happening in China also, and also in Mexico and South America, which are the areas that I specialize in. But there were, people who were building pyramids in Mexico at the same time as the pyramids in Egypt. They weren't made out of carved blocks or quarried blocks of stone, but they were still great big pyramidal platforms. They were probably used for different things, like making celestial observations and astronomical observations. But there were complex structures happening on the coast of Peru at the same time that the pyramids were being built in Egypt. So we really need, if you want to think globally, you have to really keep in mind that other really interesting things were happening in places very distant from either Mesopotamia or Egypt.
Yeah, no, I would love to think globally and keep all track. Though I think for the purposes of this show, I'm just trying to keep with the
Sure.
semi-straight line, but more like conspiracy threadboard as to sort of how we recognize what history is, in our modern definition, and sort of the what could be and might be considered extending back the historic era as it gets redefined and as it grows, because we do know the names of peoples, where they settled and lived and how they lived, and and then we're learning more and more, and maybe that goes back to Göbekli Tepe, maybe it goes back further, maybe there were interruptions, maybe there weren't, or maybe it did start with the domestication of animals and plants, which seems pretty likely, because why would you stay in one place unless you have everything in one place?
Well, and food production is directly linked to population growth. So once people are producing food, then when you have surplus food, you get surplus population. And population growth means you need bigger and bigger settlements. It means more and more specialization. It means you have enough food to feed the guy who spends all day making pottery, or you have enough food to feed the guy who spends all day making textiles, or you have enough food to pay the people who are managing the temple, or or being in the military, or whatever it happens to be. But food production allows for specialization, and specialization underwrites artists and scribes and architects and all of those kinds of things. So once you have basic food surpluses, and the technology for producing large quantities of food, then the population follows.
Right. And you can trade with your neighbors with surpluses, and at some point you figure out you can feed a standing army, which means you don't need to trade with your enemies. You just take them over and take their stuff. And that's I mean, my understanding of the giant advantage that Egypt has. One of the reasons it is the first air quotes civilization is because they were never droughts. They or rarely that the Nile flooded every year. They knew exactly when it was, and they planned their entire economy around it. And because they had so much extra food, they had a standing army, and that's how they were able to be the first nation state. And and if you want to call it empire.
Right.
And then later on, they were the breadbasket for both Hellenistic and Roman expansion.
Well, that's right. And some of the first writing that we have from ancient Egypt, some of the first hieroglyphic inscriptions that we have, are about military expeditions. They're pre-dynastic representations of things like lion hunts, that may be metaphors for military raids. But then we get things like the Narmer palette at about 3100 BCE, a little over 5,000 years ago, that actually shows a military leader of ancient Egypt smiting his enemies, and is depicted with rows of people who've been decapitated, and bulls that are knocking down the walls of cities, and so militarism comes in around the same time in Egypt that writing does, and then of course the writing is used to record these military successes and intimidate your enemies. Because if you record that you had prevailed in this particular encounter, then you can use that to persuade other people that they better give you what you want, or they're going to get it too.
I wonder if we can blame that on the wolves, or we're just a different kind of primate.
It's hard to say, but humans have been in conflict for a very long time.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people like to romanticize the past and everything, but as often as you find an elderly or what we would call disabled Neanderthal that's made into their old age being cared for by the community, you also find a skull with a crack in it that looks like someone hit them over the head with a bone or a club or something of that sort. But yeah, I was listening to a show. It was probably The Ancients, and they're talking about the sword was the first weapon that was clearly made only for men. The arrows were for hunting, even daggers. Axes were for chopping wood and other things. And sure, they could be dual purpose. But once you start finding swords, you know that you are firmly into the age of war, because there's no use for it. you can use a spear or arrows to take down a boar or whatever. You don't need a sword for that. It's just to kill people. So I don't know. I guess Homer in what was in the beginning of the Iliad, the quote anyway, whether he put it there first or whether there is a he, said something like, "The blade itself incites violence."
Interesting. Yeah, it's like what you said earlier. You gotta, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When you have a sword, everything looks like a throat.
Well, I'm looking for nails and multidimensional. So, so admittedly for looking for stuff, but I'm certainly willing to listen that maybe what I've heard about Uruk and Eridu are not necessarily true. I think that sounds neat, whatever. But a lot of things are just phonetics. I was listening to a gentleman who I would love to have on the show, who was talking about mostly stuff about Wales and old Welsh culture. But he also, apparently there's a character called Idris in Wales, and he was tying that to Idris of the Quran, to Enoch from the Book of Enoch, from the old Bible, which people can disagree as to whether that's fan fiction or has anything to do with the actual intention of Enoch in the Bible itself. But I'm thinking that's more of just phonetics, and as opposed to reading that's actually, if you go through the Book of Enoch, that the map actually takes you to the western reaches of Britain. But happy to listen to that kind of stuff, I guess, is my point. Doesn't mean I'm going to be convinced, but like Bill O'Reilly used to say, we report, you decide. But I always like to have actual academics out here to debunk those things, clarify, and especially someone like John who likes to have fun with that stuff too. But is like, I'd love to believe it too, but I'll tell you why I can't. And also, and anyway, so yeah, I think we covered a lot of things. We got a lot of names. We got a lot of places. They're in some of the usual suspect places, and that should make sense. I'm sure in time we will learn more about Africa and Saharan and sub-Saharan Africa as well, as the continent stabilizes and there's more room for archaeology there. And that goes for the Middle East too, but there have been times where it's been safe to do archaeology in the Middle East, for better or for worse. And right now probably is one of those times.
Well, in Ukraine too. I mean, Ukraine has some amazing archaeology, but it's not a great place to be doing archaeology right now.
That's true. And neither is Kazakhstan, not exactly a safe place to go. And frankly, probably neither is Turkey. I don't know what is that's safe to be doing archaeology at the moment, or really anything, which is one of the reasons I never leave the house, or rarely leave the house. I did leave the house yesterday. I'm lying. I'm lying to everybody. I was very efficient. Anyway, John, thank you as always for being on the show, generous with your knowledge and time, patient with the ramblings of a semi-educated but Sebing goober like myself.
But exceptionally well informed. I'm really impressed, Jeff. You know a lot.
Oh, see, this just tingle up my spine. You hear that, Thomas? You still there? You hear that? I am smart. I'm so like the little dog in that cartoon. I just want my big strong friend to be impressed. Thank you, Rams fan.
And one recommendation I'll make, and it may sound strange coming from a university professor, now emeritus, but I love Wikipedia. Making a deep dive into Wikipedia on these cultures that I mentioned is a great way to learn this stuff. Yeah, some of what you encounter is not the best, but it's so much easier than going for a dive in the library and looking at all these academic publications, which is what we do for a living. But for the average person, Wikipedia is a fantastic resource for just getting the basics, and then following your bliss, following the threads that take you down the rabbit holes that you want to explore.
Absolutely. All right. As always, it's great to have you on the show. I'm sure I'll come up with something else at some point that's good for you, or you'll point me in the direction of a colleague. If your son-in-law is at all interested in doing this without feeling any pressure, I'd love to learn more about that as well.
He'd be great. He's wonderful.
I'm so thrilled that you like your son-in-law so much. I mean, that's a wonderful thing in and of itself. In any event, thank you, folks, for for watching The Garden of Thought. Thank you for watching it on the Sports Jedi Media Network or Sports Jedi Network on all of the other platforms on YouTube. Thank you for listening on the download, whether you're listening to it on the Garden of Thought platform itself, or whether you listen to it on Sports Jedi audio, or off the Wrestling Soup Network, or wherever. I'm or even on my little YouTube channel that has no pictures, just the show art. Wherever you're watching or listening, welcome. Put comments in. If you don't get a response, send me a DM on the X at IcarusFellMD or at Dose_Evil. Just know that Dose_Evil, you have to put up with a lot of wrestling nonsense. On Icarus Fell, you're putting up with basically nothing because it's mostly dormant. But I'm happy to hear from all of you. And hopefully you follow me at those two places, or you'll find me on Facebook, or all of the above. And if you have something that you think that you are expert in, or at least very passionate in, that you want to talk about, I'm oftentimes game. As much as I love having academics and authors and things like that on the show, I also like having my regular folk on the show as well. Now, most of my regular folk don't think I'm regular. Seated, I'm a weirdo, I got it. But you're all weirdos too. You just your weirdness might not be as wide as mine, but it's probably going to be deeper than mine in some area that we can chat about. So with that, love to have you on here. And you'll see us later in the week. Thank you again. Now, friend John, because we've met in person, so you're not just a cyber friend anymore, you're a friend.
And the link to my academia.edu page should be in the chat. But yeah, you can find me on social media. I'm pretty easy to find. Just Google my name and you'll find it eventually.
Right. And don't steal my friend from me. Any of my friends. They're all mine, like Daffy Duck. Mine. All right, everyone. Talk to you later in the week. We have great shows coming up for you tomorrow. The MLW Files with Mr. Thomas. Wednesday, we have a Garden of Thought with Amber Brooke, who you met on the Out of Character podcast. She's a horror actress, model, all sorts of fun things, and she's going to be telling spooky stories. And then Thursday, we've got Jonathan Thor, who's worked on a whole bunch of projects, including a movie with Vinny Pacifico. And I think Vinny's going to be on the show as well. I'm not exactly sure. I've gotten a whole bunch of texts in that little group during the course of the show, which obviously I haven't read. But yeah, so that's going to be fun. But he's in a bunch of movies and always setting up things. And I have another guest obviously for next Sunday. I've already forgotten, but it's Leslie Juven, and we're going to be talking about Law and Character. So feels like a midweek show on the weekend, but the midweek show feels like the weekend show. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. Please like, subscribe wherever you like, maybe all the places. And John, thanks again, and we'll see you next time. And folks, we'll see you next time.